Welcome to FPAC 9. I'm Linda Mitchell-Tree, and we're in the home of Mary Raymond, visiting with her daughter Debbie, who is an opera singer by profession. Hi Debbie, welcome back to Fairfield.
Hi, thank you. It's good to be back.
Well, there's lots of people out there that would really like to know a little bit about how you left Fairfield and where you are now. Would you like to fill us in?
How I left Fairfield. Well, I can tell you how I got started singing.
Well, that'd be great.
Thanks to my mother, when I was 3 years old, she put me in these little pajamas with the little footies, and took me to the Christian church and put me in a playpen, and I sang "Away in the Manger" to the congregation in the church basement. She doesn't remember that real well, but it did happen. But what I think what is really important, we did the same thing in school. We sang in church choirs, we sang in the madrigal groups in school, in junior high, in high school. And it was our music teacher, Jane Ruby, who said, "Would you like to have private voice lessons?" And I said, "Gee, why not?" And she started me on those Italian art songs. Before I knew it, I was singing Un Bel Dì from Madame Butterfly at the age of, I think, 17. And she, for some reason, just took a special interest in me. And I think that is so important, how much responsibility a teacher has, as you well know, and how much influence you have on your students. If you have, for instance, a teacher who is, a math teacher, for instance, who is not particularly interested in that subject, chances are you aren't going to be interested in that subject, and you may never do well in math your entire life. And in the same way, when she took this special interest in me, it was something I loved to do, and took it on to be, to do it for a living. I knew I wanted to be a singer when I was about 17, but I had no idea the kind of discipline, the kind of work that's involved, the sacrifices you make. I won a contest when I think that was 17 or 18, the Southeast Iowa Symphony, singing Un Bel Dì and a Mozart aria, and toured Southeast Iowa. And that's, by the way, the only contest I've ever won. I shouldn't say that, but it's true. It started and stopped there. And went to college at the University of Iowa. I was a music major, but so were a lot of other people. And I can't say that I really learned to sing at the University of Iowa. I got a music education. I got a Bachelor of Music degree. But then from there I moved to New York City and studied privately. And that's, I think, when I really started to learn to sing and to discover what was involved if I really wanted to be a professional. I'll never forget my first real teacher in New York, Jean Kraft, said, if you can imagine yourself doing anything in the world besides singing, do it. Oh. Because you have so many doors shut in your face. You have so many disappointments. There is so much discipline involved. It has to be this fire burning inside that is what you want to do more than anything in the world. And it is. And I've tried to give up singing, I think probably 3 times since I started a career. And for one reason or another, I kept going, and I think it's that fire burning. I don't know what else I would do. It's not that I couldn't do other things, but I think I would feel totally unfulfilled if I weren't doing this.
So had you really looked at the world of professional singing as it was before you got to New York? Or do you still feel you were a little naive at that point?
I think I still had no idea. It was something I wanted to do, but since I can't really say that I had a technique that would take me anywhere when I left the University of Iowa, I started out as a coloratura soprano singing all these really, really high notes and stuff, and sometimes they were there and sometimes they weren't. And I didn't know why they were there when they were there, and that's scary. I mean, you can't go very far doing that.
Sure.
You've got to have a really sound technique. So I think I still was very naive when I moved to New York. And at that time, I was married to a tenor. We went to school together. We had the same voice teacher. And when we moved to New York, we had no place to live. We had no jobs. We did it in the middle of January with a van and took all of our possessions to New York and started from there. And that's the kind of, I think if you think about that kind of thing too much, you won't do it.
Oh, sure.
You just go with it and say, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. This feels right, we do it. And I actually lived in New York City for 6 years, and then he was accepted into the opera studio in Amsterdam. That's a program the opera company had for young singers who were professionals but not really on to a career yet. And so we moved to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and that's where I met my present husband. He is Dutch, and he was at that time the administrator of the Netherlands Opera. And my ex-husband is now, it's kind of interesting, he's married to a Dutch woman and lives in East Dubuque, Illinois, which is a little strange. But that's where I started singing really professionally. I did one performance while I was in New York of La Boheme and got $50 for the performance, and that was something. That was really, I think that's probably my first professional engagement as an opera singer.
So I'm assuming that there's generally an agent involved, that you just don't...
There wasn't at that time. There certainly is now. It would be really hard to have a career without an agent. A lot of companies won't even hear you if you don't have an agent. And that was another problem I had. The system of agents over in Europe is quite different from the United States, but I lived in Europe in Amsterdam for 10 years, and sang around. I didn't really do anything of note until I think it was 1988. I had done little things with the Netherlands Opera, but nothing really big. And it was 1988 when I went to Dresden, which at that time was still the old East Germany. It was before the wall came down. And sang an audition to do Salome. Salome by Richard Strauss is one of the most difficult roles in the soprano repertoire. It's a short opera. It's about an hour and 32 minutes or so. But it's hard. And the orchestra is huge. And Salome, there's no intermission. Salome comes on after about 5 minutes after the opera has started, and she never leaves the stage. And whether she's singing or whatever, she's of course having to stay in character. And if you have to go to the bathroom, forget it. If you have a eyelash that's not working here, forget it. I mean, you're in character for this hour and 32 minutes or hour and 45 minutes, depending on who's conducting. But I went to Dresden and auditioned to be Salome. They weren't convinced. I had never sung Salome before. I had never sung much before. I mean, not really professionally, considering what a lot of people had done at that point. And they asked me back for another audition. I was living in Amsterdam at the time, and I flew back. This is all at my own expense, of course. I flew back for a second audition. Yeah, but we think that in the middle of your voice, the E vowel isn't going to carry. So I went back to my teacher, who at that time was in London, and worked on my E vowel and went back for a third audition. And this third audition consisted of an hour rehearsal with the stage director to see if he could work with me. Forget it if I could work with him. It was if he could work with me. And following that hour rehearsal, I sang an audition on stage of the entire role. I don't know how I did it. I don't think I could do it today. It's another one of those things. It's like moving to New York from Iowa. You don't think about it. You're there, you do it. And it's another example of that fire burning. It was what I wanted more than anything. So I was willing to do anything I had to do to get this role. And I have to point out that Dresden is the theater where Richard Strauss premiered not only this opera, but a lot of his operas. So there was a lot of history here. The orchestra, the Dresdner Staatskapelle, is the best Strauss orchestra in the world. And it was an enormous honor to do this role in this theater. They did hire me to do it. I was there for 8 weeks rehearsing and had in that 8 weeks only 4 days off, in which I could go to, I had a visa to go to West Germany to meet my husband, and that was almost a disaster because the visa was for some reason stamped with the wrong date, and my passport was stamped with another date, and I had to get off the train, and the train went on, and I had to take my luggage, and they had to inspect me, and they were looking for drugs, and it was quite an amazing experience. And I was in a room with a camera and alone with magazines that were about 6 months old. And I first started to cry, and then I started to laugh. I thought, this is absurd. This is like out of a movie. They finally did let me go. They had to clarify why there were different dates stamped, and who knows why there were different dates stamped, but somebody did that at one time. But it was a really educational experience for me. It was, I can't say I was particularly healthy because when I left, when I came back home from Dresden, I think I looked like I'd been in a concentration camp. The food was not particularly good there, and I was working sometimes 10 hours a day. And also in Salome, she does the Dance of the Seven Veils, so a lot of my rehearsals were dancing rehearsals, and it was exhausting, but it was fabulous. I mean, I was doing something I had dreamed of doing, and that took me another step, a really important step in my career. I've done Salome since then, at least 25 performances of it, some more in Germany and Arizona Opera and Salt Lake City and Charlotte when I returned to the United States. So it's been a really important role for me. But let's see, where was I? I was in Amsterdam for 10 years, and then decided, well, actually it was my husband, who was Dutch, Nando Schellen. He was, let's see, at that time when we were ready to move, he was the director of the Music Conservatory in Amsterdam. And he had always wanted to live in America, and he wanted to be married to an American. He was getting part of his dream.
Working out well.
Working out very well. And he wanted to own an American car. He has a Pontiac now. And he was hired by Indianapolis Opera as a general director. So we moved to Indianapolis. And that was in, I think, 91 or so. And we have been there ever since. He has since resigned from that position, and he's freelance. He's also a stage director. But that's when I moved back to the States. I have to say that I'm happier in a way being back here. I mean, I still travel back and forth. I still have, I have an apartment in Amsterdam still. Mm-hmm. My husband has 4 children. They're all grown and live in Amsterdam and in France. So I'm still hopping around a lot, but I have to say that I'm really happier being back in the States. The rehearsal schedule, we were talking about agents being very different in Europe as opposed to in the United States, but also the whole system is different. First of all, your opera companies, all the arts are subsidized by the government in Europe, and they are not. Mm-hmm. As we know here, they get a very little bit. So we're very dependent on box office and on private sponsors here. That means that the opera companies cannot afford to do a lot of performances. So when unless you're talking about the Metropolitan, San Francisco Opera, Chicago Lyric Opera, whatever, these really big companies, you do 2, 3, 4 performances of one opera. Now, artistically, this is very frustrating. Mm-hmm. Financially, it's also very frustrating. But you rehearse for, say, 2 weeks. That's also a big difference. In the United States, you rehearse 2, 3 weeks tops for a production. I mentioned in Dresden, I rehearsed for 8 weeks every day. And the difference, a big difference artistically, is that you can explore a character, you can really get the feel of that character, and know, so that it's like an old pair of shoes. You know, you feel really comfortable with that character, and you know how she would react to different situations, and you get the time to feel that. And here, you get time to know where she's going to be when, and sort of get to know your other characters. I mean, we are trained also in the United States because of this system. We're trained very well in music schools and in opera workshops to learn quickly. We pick up things much more quickly. My husband's often said that because he's a stage director. In the United States, when you're working with opera singers, you get done more in 1 hour than you get in 3 hours in Europe, because they're trained. They know I'm not sure whose principle that is, but it's like, you know, you take up the space that you have, and you take up the time that you have. So if you're allotted 9 weeks for an opera, you're going to take up that 9 weeks. You're going to need every minute of it. If you're given 3 weeks, you're going to take up that 3 weeks, and you'll be ready. On a certain level, you will be ready to go at that point. So it's a totally different system. I've learned, to pick up things very, very quickly here, and to try to experience the character as much as possible. I come prepared. By the first rehearsal, I've thought about my character a lot, and I'm very well prepared at that first rehearsal. I did Tosca last year in Green Bay, Wisconsin, of all places. Who knew Green Bay had an opera company? Next to the Packers, it's this Palmiro Opera. And we had one performance. I'd never done Tosca in my life. This is a huge role. It's one of those fiery women, you know. She's a prima donna. She is an operatic prima donna. She's a singer in the opera. And so I really had to think a lot about this. Plus, to say nothing against the stage director, he had done only Gilbert and Sullivan when we entered these rehearsals.
To do Tosca. Oh,
to do Tosca. And thank God the Scarpia had done the role many times, and so the second act is very hot when Scarpia is trying to convince Tosca to sleep with him in order to save her lover's life, because otherwise he's going to be executed. And so it was a really hot second act. But it was due to the fact that he had done it so much, and I had really thought about it, and yeah, it was really exciting. But otherwise, God knows what we would have had with Gilbert and Sullivan. But, I mean, those are wonderful experiences. I had, I did, Tchaikovsky wrote a beautiful opera called Eugene Onegin. It's in Russian. Tchaikovsky was Russian. And I was invited, I suppose, about 4 years ago to go to Minsk in Belarus to do Onegin. Now, I also was only going to do one performance. And I had done the opera once in German, in East Germany, but I'd never done it in Russian. So, and this is not a language I speak. That's another thing, you know, I do speak German. I speak Dutch, which is not handy for opera, though I've sung 3 operas in Dutch and hope that I never sing another one. I speak a little Italian, I speak a little French, and it helps if you speak the language. But Russian is not one of my languages. So this means that in the beginning I had to learn phonetically, and then I did indeed have to learn what I was singing all the time, in addition to what everyone who's singing to me is singing all the time. So it's a lot of work. You do a lot of work before you even show up for that first rehearsal. And everyone else in the cast was Russian. The conductor was Russian, everybody was Russian. I had 2 weeks to rehearse and showed up, and the stage director was in the hospital. I never did meet the stage director. But Russia is sort of on a different planet where the arts are concerned. It's fabulous what they do, but they're like 50 years behind us. And I saw a performance while I was there of Tosca, and the tenor he was up on the scaffold, he was painting this painting, and he's starting to sing about Tosca. He has this big aria. He comes down the ladder, comes to the footlights, sings the aria, takes a bow, goes back up the ladder, and starts painting again. And I thought, what is this? I mean, it's like you're really going back in time. Mm-hmm. So since I had never seen the stage director, I thought, well, how am I going to get the staging? Well, they had, like, in this company, everyone who's in this company is permanently in this company, like they get a monthly salary, they sing, they don't travel around, they sing in this company all the time. They do many performances a week. So there were in this company about 6 sopranos who were Tatianas, that's the name of this character. So this one would come over and say, honey, now you do this and this and this. And the other would say, no, I think you want to do this, this, and this. And it was so much fun. And they were all little mothers. They were treating me like their daughter. And it was very exciting until the day before the performance, which was my only rehearsal with the orchestra. About 3 days before that, my interpreter had come down with a terrible cold. I needed her. And she was very embarrassed and felt very bad about this. And she said, I don't know what to do, because I said, if I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it. But I'm not going to get it. Well, I got it. And the day before the performance, we had this one orchestra rehearsal, and I had developed a tracheitis, which means I had no voice. And so the conductor is saying, okay, you're just going to go. This is an orchestra rehearsal, my only orchestra rehearsal. So I didn't utter a sound, I just mouthed the whole opera. Afterwards, they took me to their otolaryngologist, or whatever she called herself, and she didn't speak any English, and my interpreter was sick, so she was home. So they had this, one of the Tatianas spoke a few words of English, and she took this syringe and put it in, well, first she looked down my throat and she said, trachit. Well, I didn't speak a lot of Russian, but I knew that meant tracheitis, and I said, I know. So she took this syringe and put it in this orange goop and put that down my throat and squirted it directly onto my vocal cords while I was phonating an E. And through this soprano, I understood that for about 20 minutes I was going to feel a discomfort. Well, what she had done was anesthetize my vocal cords. And it's sort of like when you get Novocaine into your jaw, or to have a tooth worked on, you start to feel like everything is swelling up, because it is. And not 20 minutes later, but that night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I went, It was like I had cotton balls in my throat. And at that time, I just went. I had no control over what was going to happen. The next day was my performance. There was nothing I could do. I just had to leave this up to the universe. Whatever, you're going to take care of this. And the next day, I still couldn't speak, so I didn't, and went through the entire day and got to the theater. I had only had the costumes on once, and they were huge because the other Tatianas were bigger than I was. And they had said, it's all right, it'll be okay. I hadn't seen them since that one time. I put them on, they all fit. The wigs had not fit, they put them on, they fit. I go on stage, I open my mouth, I have a voice. I sang the entire performance. It was great. The next day, I had a full-blown cold. I was coughing, I was sneezing. I couldn't have sung a second performance, but it worked. And I found out later when I came back to Indianapolis, this otolaryngologist was inspecting my cords, because I was sick for about a month after that. I couldn't really sing. And he said, I can't believe they did that. You should never let anyone do that. I said, well, thank you. Thank you for telling me that now. And that's the kind of thing you have to be so careful as a singer. Prednisone is another one that they take here. It's a cortisone kind of thing. And a lot of singers, if they get bad colds and can't sing on it, then they'll give you prednisone. And it's like shooting cortisone into an athlete's knee, the football player, whatever. He can run because he feels no pain. The danger is that he feels like he can run forever. Mm-hmm. And so he's bound to put more weight on that knee than he should. And the same goes for the vocal cords. You're bound to sing on them really hard in a way that you wouldn't normally. And that happened to a singer. Actually, it's very interesting. Virginia Opera was doing Salome, and I was just coming back. It wasn't Minsk. I was coming back from Europe for something. And I came back, I was at the airport, and my husband met me, and he says, you have to call Peter Mark Virginia Opera immediately. Well, he wanted me to run to Virginia Opera, and the soprano who was doing Salome had gone home in between performances because her father had died. She went home and she got sick. And she came back, and they do performances in Norfolk and in Virginia and in Richmond. And they have a little break in between. Well, she had done her last performance in Norfolk, went home to her father's funeral, came back, she was sick. They put her on prednisone. And she felt okay. But he wasn't, Peter Mark, the general director, was not convinced. So he wanted to fly me in, to sit in the pit, and ready to sing at any moment. This was a very static production. She had basically, it was this kind of thing where she could only do this. It was horrible. It was terrible production, but she had no movements. So they decided that the cue would be if she knelt, which she never did normally, if she knelt, that meant I can't go on. And he would point to me. I'm sitting in the pit, mid-phrase, whatever, and I would have to sing. It was the most exhausting thing I have ever been through in my life. I had to do this for 2 performances. And I felt, at the end of the performance, I felt like I had sung the entire performance, and I hadn't opened my mouth. It was horrible. But what's also interesting is that I came back to sing this last year at Virginia Opera. And the last performance in Norfolk, my mother called me up and told me that my father had died. And I had a performance. And so I sang the performance, and I was fine, but I told Peter, I said, this has happened, and I really need your help. And I didn't tell anyone else, because I didn't want anyone going, like, we really feel bad for you or something. So I made it through the performance fine, and afterwards I was a wreck. And he said, I was going to come home and see Mother, and she said, if you're doing that for me, don't do it. I'm fine. If you're doing it for yourself, then okay. And Peter said, I think your mother has a lot of people who are taking care of her now, and you're probably better off staying here. And I know he was also afraid of what might happen. So I stayed, got through the other 2 performances, and then came home, and everything was fine. But there are some strange experiences, I must say. And I think all the time, to say that I live for my voice is maybe going too far, because it's a total experience. It's something that I have just decided is my life. Mm-hmm. And I try to take care of my body for the singing, but for myself too. It's hard to separate it. It's not just a voice. It's everything you do. Mm-hmm. Everything you put into your body is reflected somehow. I have an Ayurvedic doctor in London whom I call regularly. I don't know if you know about Ayurveda, but it's they have it actually here. It's an East Indian method of healing the body, the mind, the spirit. They don't look at just treating symptoms, and it's more than holistic. They treat you, and they deal with chakras, and they can make a diagnosis by just feeling your pulse. And at one point in my life, it was necessary to find someone like this who really saved my life and my husband's. And I call him up still. I think the last time I saw him was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe. And I still call him up now and then when things aren't quite in balance, and he'll tell me what to do. I had hives when I went to Virginia the last time. Let's see, this was in March of this year. I was going back to Virginia to do some concerts before I went on to Charleston to the Spoleto Festival to do Wozzeck, which I just did. And I had just broken up, my father had died, and I had just broken up with my agent. Not a pleasant experience. And actually, it could have been better than it was, but at first she said that I had her blessing, and then she started slinging mud, and then I got into the ring, and it was terrible. It was ugly. And I started doing this. I thought, that's weird. And I got to Virginia, and I was doing a series of concerts, fundraising concerts. So I was wearing this ball gown, and I was fine for the concerts because I was so concentrated, but it's getting, it was April. It wasn't March, it was April, and it was getting warmer. And afterwards, I'm schmoozing with people, and I'm going, this is not cool, And so they put cortisone into my body, and it didn't touch me, and it was just getting worse and worse. And my entire body was covered with hives. And I felt like a leper. It was hard, except my face, thank goodness. My face is okay. And I went from Virginia directly to Charleston, where they put me on prednisone. But what I found out was very interesting. Prednisone doesn't affect the voice unless you're taking it for the voice. If the voice is healthy, then it doesn't affect it, which was really important because I didn't know what was going to happen, but that was fine. They did that for 4 days, and I did get over it. But in the meantime, I called my Ayurvedic doctor, and he put me on a vegetarian diet, took me off all flesh, even fish and dairy, and I felt so wonderful just being on this diet. It was fabulous, and have pretty much stuck to that since then. I know there are a lot of people who don't agree with that. That's fine, but I also run. I run 5 or 6 times a week, and I do workouts as well. And try, it doesn't mean I don't eat chocolate, because I do eat chocolate. I love chocolate. And I drink alcohol now and then, but while I'm performing, I never do. This whole run, I had a very busy, the last 8 months has been really quite busy, but particularly from the beginning of February through June has been just pretty much nonstop for me. And while I'm in production, while I'm performing, I never drink alcohol until the last performance. And I don't know whether that's necessary or not, but it is for me, especially wine, especially red wine, because it takes me down about half an octave the next morning. It's not worth it. I certainly don't smoke. I used to. Years ago I smoked. And said that didn't affect my voice, which is totally ridiculous. It does. And try not to be in an atmosphere with smoke. In the United States, thank goodness that is usually possible. In Europe, it's often impossible. To find a smoke-free restaurant or a smoke-free section in a restaurant is sometimes really difficult. But, as I talk about these things, it sounds like they're real sacrifices, but they're not, because it's something I love and it's something I really want for me, and so it's a way of life. I guess we all do this. We all make decisions for what we want to do with our lives, and then take that path, And what's right for me isn't going to be right for somebody else. And I know singers who smoke, and singers who drink a lot. I know a tenor, amazingly enough, who he sings really big stuff. He sings a lot of Wagner, and he's a very famous tenor. And he was singing Meistersinger, which is a very difficult tenor role. And the last act is so enormously difficult. And he would get incredible nerves. And I would see him in the canteen in Bayreuth, where they have the Wagner Festival in the summer. And before the last act, he would sit there and drink scotch and smoke a cigar. And that was the way he got through that. And it was always better when he did that. And I don't know, what that did to his voice, but it made him relax, which was, of course, very important. Otherwise, he was shaking like a leaf. So you figure, whatever helps you. Franco Corelli, a very famous tenor, used to go on stage. He would never go on stage until his wife had appeared in the dressing room with the rosary and the holy water and the poodle, and and he would always cross himself before he went on stage. And they would have to push him on stage because he was sure he couldn't do it. I mean, Lily Pons was a famous soprano who always threw up before she went on stage. It's a really nerve-wracking profession. And there are so many things going on at once. I mean, what's exciting about it is what makes it nerve-wracking, because it's live. Anything can go wrong. Anything can happen. Wonderful things happen on stage that don't happen like in films, because you can always redo it. Or painting. I mean, in a way, it's very spontaneous. But if you don't like what's on there, then you can change it. Recordings. I mean, that's what it's nice about recordings, because you can make the perfect recording. And now with the technique we have, the technology, it's incredible. You get the perfect recording, but it's not, somehow the human element is taken out of it, because if the high note doesn't work, then you can be sure they're going to do it over until it works, because why would they put it on a recording if it's bad? And when you're out there and you're in front of the public, what is coming out is what they've got. And it's not always perfect, but that's what makes it so exciting. And you have a conductor. What I love about opera is that it combines all the elements. You combine the voice, an orchestra, a conductor, a stage director, costumes, makeup, lighting, sets, acting. Everything comes together at once, sometimes dance as well. And it's all in one total performance. So the chances that things are going to go wrong are great. Huge. But when you get all those elements working so that everything is like in sync, it is so exciting. And we had in Charleston this year, with this production of Wozzeck, we had that happening because it was a fabulous cast. It was incredible stage directors who really, they knew the piece so well, they came so well prepared, but they also know the human character really well. And Wozzeck is a very depressing piece, but a really human piece. It's about people in poverty, people who are never going to come out of it, and in the end die. I mean, Wozzeck kills his wife because she's been cheating on him, but it's not that simple. It's not that simple at all. Because it's never that simple in life. It's not just, one side. There are so many different sides to a character and to your situation in life, and all those things came together, and the sets were fabulous, and the conductor was wonderful, and the orchestra there it's all young musicians who audition from all over the United States to be in this orchestra. So, and they're all graduated from college, so they're not students, but they have that enthusiasm of young musicians who are not routine. They haven't been doing it for 20 years, just sort of sawing away in a pit. They've got that excitement, and it was incredible. And everybody who came to the performances sensed that. There were a lot of people who I think stayed away because they thought, oh, Alban Berg, that's Wozzeck, it's 20th century, it's atonal music, we're scared of this. But the people who came were so excited and so glad that they had been there because their lives were just enriched a little more by having seen that performance. And that's what's really, I guess that's sort of what keeps me going, is if you can reach somebody, if you can communicate to somebody, that's worth it. And we do, in most of the opera companies I perform in, we do student performances. It's usually the dress rehearsal. Unfortunately, because dress rehearsal, you tend to want not to have to sing out all the time. Mm-hmm. And then they come to you and they say, this is for the kids, and this is important because this is our future, and so we really want you to sing out. And sometimes it's the day before your opening night, and you think, oh, God, all right, so you sing out. But it's true. I mean, those are the most critical audiences, of course, because you can't put anything past kids. They're going to tell you, I mean, if they don't like it, you're going to find out. They might even boo you in the middle of a performance. They're so spontaneous. And at the same time, I get letters from these kids because they will react in the same way, negatively or positively. And it's so exciting when they are touched, because then they're going to go on when they grow up, and they're going to have to decide if they want to do this themselves. As Jane Ruby said to me, would you be interested in these private voice lessons? I mean, that was my only exposure to opera. Were you exposed to opera when you were?
Oh, no, not at all.
I mean,
music theater, but not
music
opera
theater,
per se.
yeah. I mean, there were those Texaco opera broadcasts, but I never heard them. I never listened to them. I think I had a friend gave me a recording of Renata Tebaldi when I was probably 17 or so, and that was the first operatic voice I ever heard. And it's strange. I mean, you would think if you become an opera singer, then you sort of grew up hearing those sounds, and it was totally fun. I grew up listening to the Beatles, and I think weren't we even in a group together?
Yeah. Pop music all the way.
Yeah.
Well, how many roles do you know are in your head?
Probably about 15 or so, 15 to 20. There are probably only about 6 or 7 I could do at the drop of a hat. And I'm working on Madame Butterfly right now. The first opera aria I ever sang, Un Bel Dì, I'm now for the first time going to do Madame Butterfly in Mobile, Alabama. Mobile. In October. Y'all come. on the 16th and 18th of October. And that's the ultimate role. I mean, Salome was, I said, what a huge role that is, and it is, but Butterfly is even bigger. It's longer, and she also comes on after about 5 minutes, and then she has only about another 5 minutes of this entire opera when she's not on stage. And it's just a huge, huge role. And it's so emotional. It's very difficult because it's very emotional, and it's difficult not to let that go onto your voice. And for instance, you go through with an opera like this. I mean, Puccini is very emotional anyway in everything he wrote. And I think you go through a phase where you have to cry because it is so heartbreaking what's happening to her. I mean, she commits harikiri because she loves this Navy officer who came over and married her and went back to the United States. He didn't take it seriously, she did. And she's so convinced that he's going to come back, and everyone around her knows, they all know he's not going to come back because those guys never did. And she knows that he is. And in the meantime, she's had a child, his child, and she's so convinced, her faith is so strong, and then he does come back, but he comes back only with his American wife, just to show his American wife Nagasaki. In the meantime, finds out that she has a child, decides the child would be much better off if it were raised in America. And to her, I mean, this is, you're taking everything. You're taking my life, my son. But she has to obey her husband, because in her eyes, she's still married. And so she tells them that they can have the son, but she commits harikiri. And I'm sorry, when you go through something like this, it breaks your heart. And you can't, as a singer, as a performer, you have to get beyond that. It's a phase you actually have to go through. You can't ignore it. You go through this phase where you do cry and you sob, and then of course you can't sing. So you have to get through that and then get to the other side so that the audience is going to get this and you're not. So you're projecting feelings that you have had that now you're putting out here. It's a very strange process and very hard to explain, but I don't know how you can do it otherwise. You can't do it coldly because then the audience isn't going to experience that. So they have to get what you had at some point. And it's almost like going through a kind of therapy, to come in touch with those feelings, and then you do it so that the audience gets that. And that's another fascinating aspect of it.
Well, I know that you are known for your performances as being a tremendous actress. So do you look, when you're offered a job, do you look at who the stage director is?
Yeah. I don't always have the luxury of doing that. But that's really important. In fact, the stage director for The Butterfly, I just called before I came to see Mother on this visit because I understood he was leaving for Italy for a month, and I needed to know certain things about him. It's interesting in this character, how Japanese does he want to make it? There's a sort of mode right now to make Butterfly very authentic. So opera companies want a real Japanese butterfly, or at least a Korean butterfly. And that, I don't believe, is valid because Puccini was never in Japan. He was never in China, and he wrote to her, and he didn't know anything about the American West, and he wrote an opera on that too. So it's strictly, it is an Italian opera. It's Italian emotions. It's Puccini. It's what we call verismo, which is a certain kind of Italian opera writing it's like real characters, and we know how the Italians are. They the heart is so important, often much more important than the mind. So there has to be that Italian element, because the music is Italian, in this Japanese woman. So I was curious to know how he wanted to do it, and he's very much of my opinion that it is Italian opera, so he doesn't want it to be authentic. At the same time, there are certain gestures and movements I must make, especially in the beginning when they get married, the wedding ceremony, which takes place in Nagasaki. And so I must at least be able to walk like she was a geisha. And I talked to him about this. And then, strangely enough, there's a group of Japanese women, like 60, 70 years old, in Indianapolis, who perform every Thursday night for women's clubs, nursing homes, churches, and they do Japanese dances, and there is this woman who knows all this choreography, and they all were born in Japan, but they live in Indianapolis and do these performances. So I spoke to her just the other night, and she's going to help me.
Oh, wonderful.
And we were talking just about the walk, because I said I had seen this movie, My Geisha, with Shirley MacLaine, in which, in order to walk like a geisha, she ties her knees together with a towel. And I was sort of laughing when I said, and Toshiko Buck is her name, Toshiko Buck. She says, yes, that's how we do it. Yes, yes, because the knees must stay together to do that walk. So I'll be tying my knees together with a towel or a sheet or whatever, and just the certain gestures, that will be so important. And then in the second act, Butterfly is trying to prove that she's an American. It's very important to her that she's married to an American, so she's given up her religion for the American God, as she says it. She says that the Japanese gods are very lazy because they don't listen to you when you pray, and the American God, I'm sure, is much more tolerant. And so she's so convinced that she's American. And so sometimes you see a production where she's actually dressed in American clothes. And so I was talking to the stage director about this. So yes, it's important to me to know, like that first Salome, I had nothing to say about who the stage director was. He dictated everything. But if I have the luxury, sometimes I've even been asked, when I did Salome in Arizona, I was even asked who I wanted as a stage director, which is lovely. That doesn't happen very often. But yeah, it's very important to me. And something in opera workshops in college, very often they don't stress the acting part, and it is opera, it is not concert. Mm-hmm. You can do operatic concerts. Opera is often done in concert, on stage, without action. But even then, you're portraying emotions, and it's very hard not to do, it's not so much gestures as what's coming through the character. And through your voice. And so often operatic workshops don't stress this. And when I was at the University of Iowa, we had an opera workshop. They gave us some basic, we did little games, and you had to pick up a flower and carry it across the room with some sort of intention or something. And that's okay, but we didn't really get down to acting. So I took acting courses, which was totally optional. It was definitely not a requirement, and I was the only one in that opera workshop who did that. And I did some Ingmar Bergman and all kinds of stuff that helped me, I'm sure, tremendously. But on my own, I did that, and I think that should be a requirement. I think that's so important, and they're still doing it. Indiana University, which was, when I went to school, the opera school, except for Juilliard, in the country, and they still say they are, but it's more like a factory, but it is. They put on, I think, 6 operas in a season, and they've just gotten rid of him, but they had somebody who was their stage director, who basically taught them to do these old, what I saw in Minsk. Mm-hmm. You walk to the footlights and you do this or you do this, and the tenor sings to the soprano, and she's standing like this with the audience here, and then she has to sing, and so they turn around so that he can sing to the audience. And what is that about? I can't. I think there was a time when they believed that. Now we have television, now we have film. We're spoiled with making it real. We want it to be real. The same goes with the size of opera singers. There are still fat opera singers out there, and there's nothing wrong with that. People say, where does all that voice come in such a small body? I don't have a huge voice. And especially with the roles I sing really big roles. So compared to other women who sing those roles, who are much bigger than I am, I don't have as big a voice. So I think that probably does have something to do with it. I think that somewhere you get resonance elsewhere in your body or something, and that probably helps. But there are certain roles that people just don't believe. Butterfly, if she's first of all, if she's 6 feet tall and weighs 300 pounds, it's not going to work. It just doesn't work. Salome was also supposed to be 14. And it's a huge, I mean, it's an orchestra of like 120 pieces. This is huge. And for one voice without microphones, I mean, Broadway, Phantom, they always use microphones, so, and they have a very small orchestra, so this isn't a problem. But we're the naked voice competing with these 120 musicians who love to blast away if they don't have a conductor keeping them down. So it's a lot to ask of a singer, so I can understand why you have bigger singers with bigger voices. But Strauss also wanted someone who looked like she was 14 with a Wagnerian voice. His first Salome was huge, and she wasn't pleasing him, and he got another Salome who was smaller, and she couldn't carry over the orchestra. At that point, he made a reduction of the orchestra. He made another version with fewer pieces, only 74, which is still huge. It's still really big. And it was interesting that apparently this wasn't a big success. That I was reading, actually it was a review of me in a German magazine, and they pointed to this performance where Strauss had done this. He had reduced the orchestra for a smaller voice, and it was not a big success. They thought that what I did was a big success, so that's wonderful. Yeah, fine. But it depends also on the acoustics of the house that you're singing in, because if I'm singing in a theater with bad acoustics, I'm at their mercy. It's really horrible. And it doesn't so much matter how big the opera house is. Opera houses in general in Europe are smaller than the ones in the United States. United States are usually between 2,000 and 4,000 seats, and sometimes even more. That's huge. And to get good acoustics, you lose. I think that you reach a point where it's just impossible. The Metropolitan has about 4,000 seats, and it's, I think, pretty good, but still people ruin their voices singing in that theater because they're just intimidated by the sound. They think, oh my God, I've got to scream. It's huge. And you don't, but it's deceptive. I sang in a theater in Aachen in Germany, 800 seats, but because the seats were so plush and sound absorbing, it was the worst theater I have ever sung in. And I was singing Salome, and I think it didn't carry past the 6th row, it was terrible. And a theater like in Charlotte is 2,500 seats approximately, and that was no problem because the acoustics are better. So those things make a big difference too. I can't choose what theater I'm singing in. I can't say I won't sing in that theater because it has terrible acoustics. I'm not, I suppose, I know there are singers, Placido Domingo, I'm sure can say that, but he also doesn't have to worry about that, so, yeah.
So who's in charge during the performance? Is it the orchestral conductor? Is it you?
Yeah, he keeps everything together. The stage director lets go of the production once it starts. It's sort of like he's having a baby, and then, or she is having a baby, and then it's over. And we go into production, we're on stage, and the stage director says bye-bye. The conductor has to keep everything together because, like I said, it's live. So a singer can miss a line. Fine. A little competition. A singer can miss a line. The conductor can also miss a beat. Somehow he has to keep it together. So as a singer, you're on stage thinking of all these things at once. I mean, it's our computer is amazing. You've got a conductor to follow. You have other colleagues on stage who are hopefully with it every moment, but not always. Something can happen on stage. Someone can drop a glass, and all of a sudden there's broken glass on stage. You have to figure out how you're going to deal with that in character. But the conductor pulls everything together. You always, I mean, he has the final say, or she has the final say. I've worked actually with 2 women conductors, 3 actually, because the first was the Southeast Iowa Symphony. That was a woman, yeah. And they were my last experience in Charlotte, I did Bohème with a woman who was absolutely incredible. And what is wonderful is we had one of those connections, which is beyond words, where I knew I could do whatever I wanted to do, and she was with me every moment. It was that electricity, and she felt it and I felt it, and we didn't need to speak about it. It was there. And it was just like I knew that, and it was Bohème, Puccini, so there's a lot of what we call rubato, where you give a little, you take a little, it's a little faster, a little slower. And we were just, it's like on a toboggan on the way down the hill. It was just really wonderful. But you count on that conductor to keep everything together. You try as a singer not to stare at the conductor because that's very boring for the audience. And sometimes depending on the production, if it's very complicated with staging, you don't want to be singing upstage, what we say, away from the audience, because then the sound isn't going to carry. But sometimes you'll be singing this way, or you'll be looking at another character or something. So we have monitors out here as well, so that if you have to turn this way, so that you're not always having to face front and center, which helps a lot. I mean, years ago, of course, they didn't have that, and so the singers always had to stare right at the conductor, and it's boring, and it means that you're not totally in your character either. And for really complicated productions, sometimes you'll have monitors around here and around the side and wherever you need them. But yeah, that conductor has the very, very final say, and hopefully things don't go wrong, but when they do, you're hoping that they're on top of things. I've never been in a production, in a performance where they had to stop, but it's happened. I've been in the audience when they had to stop, when things got so out of hand, and it wasn't usually a Puccini, it was usually something modern, where things just got so out that the only thing the conductor could do was just say, stop, we're going to start from measure such and such, and you start over. Mm-hmm. But again, that's what happens. It's the human element. You're live. So those things all have to be forgivable. Critics don't always forgive, but...
Do you still have to audition for your role?
Yeah. Not always. There are certain things I've gotten without auditioning. I know singers who like haven't done an audition in years and years, and all of a sudden they're having to audition because they're going to another level. But at this moment, I'm still auditioning for most of the things I do. Ideally, someone who's going to hire you is going to have seen you in a performance, and then they won't have to audition you, because there are a few people out there, hate them, who sing really well in auditions. But you're there to prove yourself in an audition. In a performance, the people who have come to enjoy the performance. So they're supporting you. And you're in your character. You're in your character for the whole evening. In an audition, you have usually 5, 6, 7 arias you're presenting to them, and you're having to change characters every time you perform a different aria. You're only taking a little snippet out of the opera, so you have seconds to get yourself into that character and be convincing. Also in an audition, you don't want to do too much staging, because then it looks overdone. But you don't want to do it just straight, just standing there like a concert. So there are a lot of decisions to be made in an audition, and yet you want to make those 15 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes, depending on, these cattle call auditions we say that they have in New York. They'll be hearing, an opera company comes into New York to listen to singers for, say, 3 days, and they're hearing, like 50 to 60 singers a day. Now, how they know what they're even listening to by the end of the day, I don't know. But you have to somehow, from the moment you walk on, you have to make them wake up. You have to be someone special. I usually do it by taking off my shoes. Because I hate to sing with my shoes on. And if I'm doing Salome would not sing with high heels on. And I seem to choose operas where I can do it barefoot. Butterfly could also do barefoot. But they remember me because I take off my shoes. I was singing an audition for Los Angeles Opera, and or it's Los Angeles Music Center, I forget what they call themselves, but I was at the Chicago Lyric last year covering a couple of roles, and there was someone from the Los Angeles Opera who was there, and I was talking to a conductor friend of mine. He says, yeah, he was there at your audition, because this conductor was there also. And I said, oh, he'll never remember me. He says, just take off your shoes and he'll remember you. So I guess that's sort of a trademark of mine. But yeah, those auditions are very painful. And you just try to make yourself as comfortable as possible. You psych yourself out. You meditate, whatever, to put yourself into a frame of mind where you're going to convince them in those few minutes that you are the one they want. I mean, you've got a whole evening to prove that in a performance. And so, of course, that's ideal. When I was hired the first time to do Salome in Charlotte, North Carolina, the general director, had never heard me sing a note, but he heard that I had done Salome before in Europe, and I was going to do it in Salt Lake City. So he says, well, she's got to be good. So he hired me. Plus, I was singing performances in Salt Lake City when they had already started rehearsing in Charlotte. They had rehearsed for a week in Charlotte with Salome. This is almost an impossibility because she's on stage all the time. So I don't know how they were rehearsing Salome without a Salome, but never mind. I arrived after a week of rehearsals, and so I only had a week to rehearse this piece before we went on stage. It worked out fine. It was a big hit. They were still talking about it when I came back 2 years later to do Mimi in La Boheme. He hired me to do Mimi after hearing me do Salome. Now, Salome is Strauss. It's a really hefty role. It's she's a fireball. She's a spoiled brat. She demands the head of Johanna. She gets his head on a silver platter. This is the kind of character this is. Mimi embroiders flowers for a living, dies of tuberculosis. And he hired me, and it's a totally different kind of singing. He hired me to do this role based on the Salome. He'd never heard me do Mimi. That went really well. Now he's thinking of hiring me to do a totally different role. He's got me, what we say, on hold for April of '99 to do this other role. It's also a big Strauss role, which I've never done before. Not having heard me done that, but he has a feel. You know, some people just have a nose for this. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad he has a nose for me. I mean, that's great. But some people just can do that. And others, I mean, like in Dresden, I had to go 3 times to audition for the same role before they were convinced. So, yeah, there are so many different ways of getting roles. The role I just did in Spoleto, the Wozzeck, I did an audition for the woman who was casting in New York. She was convinced. But the stage directors, in this case, the stage directors were calling the shots. It was a production they had already done in Geneva, and they wanted the woman who had done it in Geneva. She couldn't do it. She wasn't available. They also wanted the Wozzeck who had done it in Geneva, and he wasn't available. So they were looking for other people. They asked another woman with whom they had worked a lot. She wasn't available. But she's a very good friend of mine, and I had covered her at the Chicago Lyric Opera 3 years ago in Wozzeck, the role is Marie, in this very role. She had seen me do some rehearsals, and she's such a dear friend, and she's also atypical of sopranos or singers at all because she has no jealousy in her. She only wants me to do well, and she wants everybody to do well, and has a wonderful heart, loves horses. And she said to them, I can't do it, but I know someone who would be really good. And it's this woman who covered me in Chicago. So in the meantime, I didn't realize that was happening on the other side of the ocean. I sang my audition in New York. The woman who was casting, Erica Gastelli, wanted me. And so she calls Patrice and Moshe, these guys in Geneva, and she says, I've heard a woman, I really want to do this. And they said, well, we've heard of a woman we want to hear because we think we've had a recommendation from someone we really trust. So we don't want you to hire this woman until we've heard this other woman. So she contacts my agent and says, what did she do when she was at the Chicago Lyric? And I said, I was covering Wozzeck. Oh, so this all comes together that I was the same woman. And so I was hired. What I didn't realize is that 3 other very famous sopranos had contacted these stage directors personally. One was Catherine Malfitano, whom I covered as Salome in Chicago just this year, and she called them up personally and said, I would like to do this role with you. I've done it before. Unfortunately, I can only come to the first 3 days of rehearsal and the last week because I have other commitments, but I've done it before, and I assure you I'm very good. And they said, I'm sure you are. But the rehearsal process is to us very, very important. Thank you very much for calling. Oh. So I felt really, really privileged. Mm-hmm. But so that's how, how that came to be. And in fact, these two particular stage directors never work with agents. They don't even have an agent of their own. They can get by with that as stage directors. As a singer, it's almost impossible. But they are really in this business because of the personal relationships. Because in a process, this rehearsal process I had with them was so exciting, and you dig very, very deep inside to bring something out, and that's what they're in this business for, is the personal relationships. They meet so many different people, and you're enriched when you leave that situation. You are enriched. I also mentioned that when a stage director is finished with the rehearsal process, he or she leaves. These guys don't. They stay, and they're in the wings. They never sit out in the audience, but they stay in the wings watching to the very last performance because it's their baby, and they want to know. They say they can tell by listening to the voices how the performance is going. And it's so wonderful because it's no longer just a business as it has been made in so many circumstances. It's commercial. We're making money here. Well, I'm not, but
someone is.
Someone is. Yeah, I know someone is. But this brings you back to what we're really doing this for. It's the communication. It's making music. Oh, Mother will get that phone.
Pick up the receiver.
Hello? So that was my agent. No, it wasn't. I'm just kidding. So I think what I wanted to say is that these guys, these stage directors, who are working with people to communicate to people, remind me of why I'm doing this. I don't think it's why I started out doing it because, when I started out doing it was because I wanted to sing, and then it was because I thought I wanted a career, and then because, who knows, I was singing because I had a music education. I had a Bachelor of Music degree. My parents thought I should do that, or my parents didn't think I should do it, and for all kinds of weird reasons. And in fact, there was a period in my life where I had to stop singing for about a year and a half when things broke down. My body broke down. My shoulder went out, my back went out, everything, because I was having a lot of physical problems. But I also was singing for the wrong reasons. And it was actually after that I got with my Ayurvedic doctor, that I sort of reevaluated why I was singing and realized now, it's those kids who write you a letter and say how you affected them, or it's someone who comes up to you and says, you've really touched me by this performance. Whatever, that little bit of communication, that's what it's about. That's why we call it a performing art. So I'm doing this Butterfly in Mobile, Alabama, and we would like everybody in Fairfield to come. There are only 2 performances, but it's a big theater, so you all fit. But it is in Italian. However, as a lot of people don't know, we have now, since about 10 years ago, super titles. So this is like you're watching a film in a foreign language and you see subtitles down at the bottom of the screen. Here you're watching an opera sung in Italian, or German Italian in this case, with English super titles above the stage. And there are few words there. Hopefully you read the synopsis before you go so that you know basically what's happening. But you can follow what's being said the whole time up here, or you don't have to, because they're above the stage. They're not disturbing your line of vision with the stage. So it doesn't disturb. I think a lot of people, it takes a while to get used to it because you see this up here and you're just staring at it the whole time going, wow. Oh yes, there's a performance going on. But I think that takes just a few minutes to get used to that. And it makes an enormous difference in the enjoyment, I think, for many people. I know my father said, Mother and Daddy came to Charlotte to see my Salome, and they came to Green Bay to see the Tosca. and they came to Arizona to see the Salome. And Daddy said that if it hadn't been for that, he wouldn't have enjoyed it nearly as much, even though we had told them the storyline, and I think they'd even heard some of the music beforehand. But it really does increase your enjoyment enormously, and I think has made it much more popular in this country. Well, they're doing it now in Europe as well. So it's not so much it doesn't have that snob appeal that it used to. You know, we used to think that just people who were really educated went to opera, and that's not necessary.
Thank you for sharing all this with us.
Well, thank you. This has been fun. I love to talk.